Welcome to the Analytical Mind podcast, where we solve business problems data can fix. The goal of this podcast is to teach our community how to think analytically using business logic. Welcome to episode 1. So, in today's episode, we'll be looking at this problem. Johnson's and Sons is a yogurt manufacturing firm that produces and sells bottled yogurt across several supermarkets and retail stores. At the end of month 2, the management team was excited because the company sold more yogurt than in month 1. Sales volume increased from 1,000 bottles to 1,300 bottles, and total revenue increased from 10 million to 11.7 million. Because revenue had increased, management initially believed the business was improving. However, when the profit report was prepared, they discovered something unexpected. Profit had fallen sharply from 2 million in month 1 to 400,000 in month 2. Although Johnson's and Sons sold more yogurt and generated more revenue, the business kept much less money from each sale. So the management team now faces an important question. How can a business sell more products, earn more revenue, and still end up with less profit? So let's go into understanding the terms here under the items. Then we'll talk about the table. Then we'll look at the formulas. Then we'll calculate and come up with the interpretations here. The unit sold is the number of products that a business sold. Then the selling price per unit is the amount the customer pays for one product. Then the variable cost per unit is the cost directly attached to one product, such as raw materials, packaging, transport, or commission. Then the fixed cost is the costs that do not change, or the costs that do not change much even when sales increase, such as rent and salaries. The revenue here is the total money collected from customers before any costs are removed. Then the contribution per unit is the amount left from one product after removing the direct costs of that product. Then our total contribution is the total amount left from all products sold after removing the direct cost. The profit now is the money left after both direct cost and fixed cost have been removed. The gross margin, finally here, is the percentage of revenue that the business keeps after paying the direct cost of the product. So let's begin our logic. Okay, so now we have the values for both month 1 and month 2. Values include the unit sold, the selling price per unit, the variable cost per unit, and the fixed cost for each month. So these are direct inputs, right? They are direct inputs. So let us go ahead and calculate our revenue now. So revenue now, if we were to calculate revenue manually, so revenue will be equal to what? Our unit sold multiplied by selling price per unit. So it will be unit sold multiplied by selling price per unit. So is that clear? So revenue is units sold multiplied by selling price per unit. So if we were to calculate the revenue here for month 1, what we will do is to say our revenue, we say equals to units sold. Our units sold for month 1 is here. So we can just click on it. Then hold down Shift and 8 to enter asterisk, which represents multiplication. And we are multiplying units sold by what? Selling price per unit, right? If we do that, we hit enter, we will calculate our correct revenue for month 1. So let us take that to month 2 as well. So we can say equals, that's revenue equals our units sold, which is 1,300, multiplied by our selling price per unit, which is 9,000 here. We hit enter. So you see, we have calculated our revenue. So the next we will calculate is our contribution per unit. So we want to calculate our contribution per unit. And we said earlier when we we're talking about the terms, we say contribution per unit is the amount left from one product after removing the direct cost of the product, right? So the direct cost now for month one is 6,000 naira. For month two is 7,000 naira. So we'll take that away, subtract that from our selling price per unit. Do we get that? So contribution per unit, it equals selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. Okay, so is that clear? Contribution per unit is equal selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So if we were to determine that here, we'll say equals our selling price per unit minus our variable cost per unit. So it's going to give us what? Our contribution per unit. That is the contribution of each unit in month one. Let's do that for month two. Equals selling price, which is 9,000, minus variable cost per unit, and hit enter. So we have our contribution per unit for both month one and month two. So let's look at our total contribution. And a reminder of what a total contribution means again. The total contribution is the total amount left from all products sold after removing the direct cost. Our total contribution per unit will now be contribution per unit multiplied by units sold. It will be what? So total contribution per unit will be equal our contribution per unit multiplied by our units sold. Okay, is that clear? So let us actualize it here. Okay, so total contribution will now be our contribution per unit. So we'll say equals. Remember, before inserting any formula in Excel, we have to use the equality sign. So we'll say equals contribution per unit multiplied by the unit sold, right? So that will give us our total contribution. Sorry, let's do that again. So we'll say equals our contribution per unit multiplied by our units sold. So that will give us our total contribution, okay, for month one. Let's do that for month two. We'll say equals contribution per unit multiplied by units sold. So that will give us that. So now let us look at the calculation for profit. Before we look at the calculation for profit, let us remind ourselves what the profit means. The profit means the amount left after both direct costs and fixed costs have been removed. Okay, so here we are looking at, we use variable costs here as our direct cost. So, and fixed cost is our fixed cost. So when we take away variable cost and our fixed cost, what is left from revenue will be what? Our profit. So let us look at that now. So we'll now say profit is equal total contribution minus fixed cost. Okay, total contribution minus fixed cost. And why did we simply just say total contribution minus fixed cost? That is because our contribution per unit was our selling price. Okay, look at it. Was our selling price minus our variable costs. So we had already taken out what? Our variable cost. So the amount we have here as our contribution per unit, okay, is without the variable cost. So we are already taking that out. So if we say total contribution minus fixed cost, we will be getting our correct profit here. So our profit here will now be equals total contribution here, right, minus fixed costs. This is fixed costs minus fixed costs here will give us our profit. Let's do the same here. Okay, let's do the same here. We'll say equals total contribution minus what? Our fixed costs. This. Okay, so we'll now have our profit here. Okay, so now let us go and look at let's look at our gross margin. Our gross margin is in percentage. Okay, so our gross margin will be total contribution, right? This total contribution, because remember the gross margin is what? We say gross margin is a percentage of revenue the business keeps after paying the direct cost of the product. Okay, after paying the direct cost. So we have removed variable costs from our contribution per unit. That gives us our total contribution, right? So that means our gross margin can be total contribution divided by revenue, right? So our gross margin will be equal total contribution divided by revenue. Okay, total contribution divided by revenue. So let's do that here. We can say equal. Our total contribution is this, and remember our revenue is this, right? We say divide by revenue. Okay, gives us that. Okay, 40%, and that is because we had already formatted this to percentage. Okay, so let's do that here. Total contribution here, divide by revenue. Okay, will give us our gross margin here. In units sold, in month 1, Johnson's and Son sold 1,000 units. In month 2, they sold 1,300 units. The selling price for month 1 per unit was 10,000. The selling price for month 2 per unit was 9,000. So the variable cost per unit was 6,000 in month 1 and 7,000 in month 2. So the thing here is that revenue increased. Okay, you can see our revenue actually increased to 11,700 from 10,000 in month 1. So truly more money came in from customers. So you could see that in this month, because of the selling price per unit, it is most likely that Johnson & Son reduced discounts or apply the discount rather to increase sales in month 2. So we come to the variable cost. Okay, when we come to the variable cost per unit, you see that the variable cost per unit in month 1 increased by 1,000 to 7,000 in month 2. Okay, so each product became more expensive to provide. It became what? More expensive to provide. And remember, we said our variable costs will be direct costs coming from raw materials, packaging, transport, or commission. Remember, we said that, right? Then the total contribution fell from 4 million to 2.6 million. Okay. The gross margin also fell from 40% to 22%. So the final lesson is this: the business did not fail because it sold too little. It failed because it sold more in the wrong way. The lower price attracted more sales, but the higher cost and lower margins destroyed the profit. This is why analysts do not ask, did sales increase? Analysts ask, did each sale create enough value? So see you next Wednesday, 6 p.m. for episode 2.